So just this morning, JT Prime 17 found a post by Hasbro Pulse in their website of a reminder for a upcoming Transformers pre-order. At least that's what the belief is. What this post pretty much says is Tuesday, February 28th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, a toy of titanic proportions and equal secrecy. You should be here for this one. And then set a reminder. So the belief that it could be a pre-order for something is primarily because February 28th is going to be a Tuesday. 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time is 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And historically, Hasbro Pulse Transformer pre-orders always drop at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on those Tuesdays. So that's what it sounds like. But even when you deconstruct this little blurb here, like which character could it be then? What's this big figure that's going to go up for pre-order on Hasbro Pulse? Titanic. Could be a Titan class. Secrecy. What could that be? What is the secret? The secret of Omega Supreme, perhaps? So there's a few ways to take this apart. This all pretty much stems from back in December of 2021 when there was a Hasbro Designer Q&A. And for a brief moment, you could see the desktop of either, I believe it was Mark or Evan, and there was a bunch of folders and a bunch of thumbnails of images on it. And you could see one folder, and it had TRA ARM on it, which could potentially be Transformers Armada. And like we all know how that worked out. We got a whole bunch of Armada stuff coming this year. There was another folder that was BotBots Awesome because, well, BotBots are awesome. So. And then you had like two images that you could actually see them in their small, blurry thumbnail form. One of them was clearly what was going to be Shattered Glass Blaster, which we would then see 7 months later after that in May of 2022. And then something that looked like potentially an Omega Sentinel. And that's where we fall into this secret of Omega Supreme thing. The belief is that potentially, can't confirm it, but potentially this February 28th pre-order is going to be a Titan class Omega Sentinel, a repaint, maybe even a retool a little bit, but a repaint of the Siege 2019 Omega Supreme Titan class toy. That is the belief. Now, people who are confused, who is Omega Supreme? What's the story with that? I talked about it briefly, I think about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, but I'll kind of reiterate and how I think it's potential this could be happening. But we shall see in a moment. So essentially, the Omega Sentinel trademark really became a thing in 2005. Back in 2004, we had the Energon line. There was an Energon Omega Supreme in it. And then in 2005, they did an Omega Sentinel repaint. That whole Omega Sentinel repaint was an homage to the blue repaint that existed of Omega Supreme back in G1 in the show. Didn't really have a toy, but it was something that did exist in the show. There was these Guardian robots that were these blue repaints of Omega Supreme in the show, just didn't have a toy. And that was in the episode, The Secret of Omega Supreme. So these blue repaints existed in that very first episode in Season 2. Would later on appear again in War Dawn, and then some weird amalgam Decepticon-colored repaint would appear in some Season 3 episodes, but Season 3 is a mess when it comes to that kind of stuff. Those characters, these Guardian robots, these Omega Sentinels, which again, that term wasn't really coined back then, were just these Guardian robots to fend off the Decepticons during the early days of the war. So the first time it was coined was in 2005, Omega Sentinel, and we kind of ran with that. In 2006, they would do a repaint of the Omega Supreme Energon Tactic into Omega Sentinel also as a repaint retool. So there was a second Omega Sentinel, again, confirming that it's like, okay, the blue repaints of Omega Supreme will be called Omega Sentinels. It kind of kept that up. And that was it for that trademark. It just disappeared into the ether, and we never really saw it again at that time. In 2008, Japan had their Encore reissue line for their G1 Japan toys, and for the first time ever, they were going to get Omega Supreme, because while we got Omega Supreme back in 1985, Japan didn't. because at the time, that mold that made Omega Supreme was done by a company called Toy Box, and Toy Box commissioned Takara's rival at the time, Tomy, to make these transforming robots. Different versions of those transforming robots appeared in the bootleg market. We have Mechabot 1, all of that history. But then, of course, years later, we all know how this goes. Takara and Tomy, they had a merger in 2006, and they became Takara-Tomy. And then that opened up the opportunity to then now use this mold all these years later, and Japan got a reissue of Omega Supreme, the first time that market would finally be able to get that figure. Of course, at the same time, eHobby was this company that was working with Takara that would take some of these Encore G1 reissues and repaint them into new characters and sell them via their website. And they took that Omega Supreme mold and they turned that into Gadep or Jadep. Really depends how you want to pronounce it. eHobby was known for doing a lot of this. They had a copywriter that worked for them, Hirofumi Ichigawa, and he was the kind of guy that'd be like, hey, there's a yellow seeker in the background of that episode. Let's turn that into a character, and that's how Sunstorm was created. So Hirofumi did the same thing. He's like, hey, there was those blue Omega Supremes in that one episode of Secret of Omega Supreme. Why don't we turn that to a character? And keep in mind also, Japan never got the Omega Sentinel repaint of Omega Supreme from Energon, which they had as Super Link over there. So they only got the Omega Supreme version, never got the Omega Sentinel one. So they created Gadep or Jadep, and it was this eHobby exclusive. And that was that. It was this straight up blue repaint, slight little retool of the head sculpt just to make some more popping detail. And the rest was history. And for people that are curious, like, what's with that name? Why isn't it just called Guardian Robot or Omega Sentinel? I think they didn't know that the Omega Sentinel thing was a thing at the time. And they just kind of went with their own thing. And Hirofumi just went with Gadep or Jadep, which apparently, according to eHobby's English website, stands for Groundling Auto Destruct Power Broker. Sure. Okay. Yeah. So, and that was that. And then you fast forward, obviously, a few years, and, you know, Animated would give us Omega Supreme and that. And there would be the Omega Sentinel fleet, not just one specific character, but the whole fleet was called the Omega Sentinel fleet. And one of those ships, the Sigma Supreme, aka the Steel Haven, which was Ultra Magnus' ship and later Sentinel Prime, would be probably the most Omega Sentinel-looking ship of the bunch in terms of transformation. That was the belief by Derek Wyatt. That's kind of what he figured. If it would ever come to pass that all the ships would transform, that would be the Omega Sentinel-looking one of the colors. There's some others that have similar color schemes, but that was the intent initially, before they kind of fleshed it all out afterwards. And of course, the character of Omega Sentinel would appear later on in the Dreamwave books, the IDW books. You know, he'd make his vague appearance in the War for Cybertron Netflix series. And that was that. We fast forward to today. Where is that Omega Sentinel trademark now? Well, this is where it makes me believe there's a possibility now this could potentially happen. Because back in 2021, just a couple years ago, Marvel Legends did their Marvel's Omega Sentinel figure. And when you see that stuff like that within Hasbro, when they put the Marvels in front of it, that means it's trying to separate itself as a trademark from another trademark they'll probably have. Just like you have Marvel's Iron Fist, and then you have a Transformers Iron Fist, it means that there's potentially them of using a Omega Sentinel for something else. Gee, Hasbro, what brand would that be outside of Marvel? So there's that, first of all. That's probably looming in the background. And then, of course, we go all the way back now to Evan's or Mark's little thumbnail image there on their desktop. What's the story with that? So I explained before, but I'll explain it again. What that was it wasn't an actual one-for-one picture of the figure. A lot of times what happens is these guys, and we even saw it with the Transformer Tuesday that just passed, is they get ideas and they make pitches. And they make pitches to Takara and they go, hey, maybe we could do this. Maybe we could do that. And it's usually digibashes. They'll take a digibash, they'll send it to them and go, hey, maybe we could do this. And a lot of those pitches usually either happen or don't happen. I have a whole folder on my desktop of NDA stuff from many different eras of pitches that were put out there and then never happened, and that was that. And then they just end up in the ether. This one here, this little thumbnail, is actually like, it's not anything original. It's literally a digibash done by a member in the Transformer community named Chris CHCHCH, which he did in 2019, even years before even that Q&A image, and combined with some stock images of Omega Supreme next to it, just to kind of show a comparison of probably the gang mole and everything. And I'll even post it here in its non-blurry version up on the screen. So that's kind of what that was, and I'm pretty sure it was probably on Mark or Evan's desktop for a pitch. Hey, maybe we could do this one day. And especially at that time, in 2021, I mean, the thing with Titan classes is right now, they kind of have a rocky kind of distribution, because like the last time we had a repaint was the Black Zarek. That went on clearance. We had the Titan class Metroplex just recently, the Cybertron one. That went on clearance. We had the Arc. That went on clearance. It's something where it's kind of tough with that large price point. And when we look at large price points on top of that are repaints, again, the Black Zarek didn't do well, and even the other repaint that I could think of in recent years, the Grand Maximus, barely even got to its 3,000 pre-order limit. So small numbers, very small numbers. The question is if it does happen, is it going to be the Omega Supreme mold? Is it going to be a straight up repaint? Is there going to be a retool to it? The original Omega Supreme mold probably had some kind of extra heads or pieces probably put on there in case for the future. So there's a possibility there. That original Omega Supreme Siege Titan class mold was originally $159.99 in 2019. So it's probably not going to be that now with our new inflation and MSRP in 2023. A recent example could be our Cybertron Metroplex Titan class from Legacy, which was $199.99, which then, of course, also went on sale and clearance later on. So we're thinking it's probably going to be in that price range. It'll probably be, if this does happen, it'll probably be a Gen Selects online thing. It'll probably be in that price range of $199.99. The only left field thing I could imagine, if it isn't that, is maybe it could be taking that Arc mold, giving it an Omega Supreme head, and it's the animated Arc. Wouldn't that be crazy? That's a crazy left field concept, but I mean, that's one way I could see it. But that's what's going on here, essentially, is there's a potential of an Omega Sentinel. There's a little bit of the history. You could come to your own conclusions. I put the images out. I gave you the knowledge. You could take it from there exactly. Let me know what you think. Is it something that would interest you, even at, let's say, that $199 current MSRP Titan class price point? Were you someone that picked up the Black Zarek when it was on Hasbro Pulse because it was something that interests you in those unique colors? Let me know what you think, but it is an interesting discussion to have.